Good afternoon. It's a wonderful day in Philadelphia, and I'm sorry to keep you locked inside. But nevertheless, I really appreciate the kind words that Bob had. Dr. Artificial Intelligence, I presume, nightmare or new dawn in medicine. And I think that we all understand that artificial intelligence is more and more pervasive in our lives, and it will be something that we'll be using. So I think this is a wonderful thing to talk about, whether you embrace it or not. And I think as you can see here, most of what I have to do has to do with neurosurgery, neuroscience, biomedical engineering. But this is a tribute to Bob Satelloff that almost 2 decades ago, with some other neurosurgeons, he had the first paper about vocal tremor using deep brain simulation. And I think it's just that lack of having the right sort of partner to play in the same sandbox with that it took so many years before he found somebody else. And we have become wonderful colleagues. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So he mentioned briefly about my bio, and certainly it's clear that I will travel for work. Probably the most impressive place that I've been to, or the most wonderful time that I can recall, is being at the Mayo Clinic, where we were just like young and stupid and had no work hours, and felt that the world was our oyster. If you recognize any of these logos or have any of those T-shirts, come up and we can commiserate later. So my name is Atom. It's not Adam. It's not Judeo-Christian. My dad was a biophysicist, and maybe that's no surprise. That's why I became one. Atom is Greek. It's atomos, undividable. And like many things that are Greek, without any offense, there's often a lingering tragedy or story that goes on with it. And here is a naming tragedy. So this is angstrom. And if you're not aware, that's a unit of measure on the atomic scale. This is Tesla. This is after the band, but before the company. So, again, a unit of measure for magnetic scale. And this is Cutie, my little one, and that's a unit of measure for radioactivity. And it's probably no surprise that I'm divorced. That being said, I include these 2 slides because, and again, I'm not the greatest parent, but it just goes to show you a little bit of sunlight, periodic feeding, and they grow up just fine. Now, surgeons are undaunted, and oftentimes you can hear the notion that we're always confident but never right. And so I had a new partner, I had a dog, and that's how I got going. And that didn't work out either. So I don't name anything. Don't ask me. Is this Philadelphia? I don't know. When I'm not doing science, when I'm not doing surgeries, when I'm not inappropriately naming things, I find friends with 4 legs, or I find 4 friends and I like to climb. So let's go back to the title, Dr. AI, I presume. And that comes from this iconic line, which may or may not have ever really truly been spoken. And I don't know if you know the story, I'll just only diverge just briefly. This is Spencer Tracy. He played Stanley in the second half of Livingston and Stanley. David Livingston was an explorer, he was an adventurer, he was many things, and he was a man of all seasons. And one thing that he absolutely was he was an abolitionist. He did not believe in slavery. And at that point in time, in the late 1900s, the East Africa Swahili slave trade was very prominent, and that was important to him, as it should have been. He felt that he did not have a suitable voice or credibility in order to try to make a difference in that trade. But he felt that if he could find the source of the Nile, he would gain so much gravitas that anything that he would have to say would then be accepted. So off he goes to Tanzania and basically seemingly gets lost. There are rumors about whether he's still alive or not, and this fellow, Stanley, is an entrepreneur and also an adventurer, and he convinced the New York Herald to send him on this journey to try to find Livingstone and see basically what was up. And this is, these are two real people, and this was a real story, and this really happened. Maybe some of it's a little bit fabricated. This is just a picture from a still from the movie, Stanley Livingstone. And when they first meet, supposedly he says, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. And I think in a way AI sort of represents that. It's a jungle, it's unknown. We don't know what we don't know. And when Stanley went to look for Livingstone, he didn't know what he was going to find. He didn't know if he was going to find something that was a better world or a worse world. And I think that's where we are with AI. And whether you believe that it's going to make everything all for the better, or if it's just nothing but an agent of evil, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. And hopefully I'll be able to convince you about why I should be talking to you about this. So any presentation on AI, of course, starts with ChatGPT. And this is what I said. Make me a presentation on AI about artificial intelligence in medicine, and I asked for 45 minutes, and they gave me 20 slides. And if you find what I have to say unsatisfying, then I can just simply forward this slide. It's not bad. It really is not bad. I mean, it doesn't know my name, it doesn't know that it's the afternoon, not the morning, but it does say that I'm excited to talk to you, so it knew that. And it has all the right words, like artificial intelligence refers to the simulation of human intelligence by machines. The process includes learning, reasoning, problem solving, and deep machine learning. All these things are reasonable. And I think I could have certainly done something like that, but I think that would have been disingenuous. And so let's take a slightly different tack. So I'm a neurosurgeon, and I'm really, really excited, proud, and happy to be that. And neurosurgery, I think, has been a part of humanity ever since we've been humans, believe it or not. Probably around 10,000 years ago, we went from hunting and gathering to creating societies, mostly in southeastern Anatolia. And at that point in time, once we became societies, we started doing things. And some things, maybe for this guy, were not so friendly, but these are trephines. These are trephines in this person's skull, and that's kind of the earliest evidence of neurosurgery. I'm sure there was no consent, I'm sure there was no reason for why it happened. It just happened, and we know that neurosurgery has been a part of humanity for as long as we've almost been people living together as societies. Some of you might recognize this as being hieroglyphic. This is the first time that the brain was ever depicted in any kind of written form. This is the Edwin Smith Papyrus. These hieroglyphs are at least 5,000 years old, if not longer. And I'd say that, again, neurosurgery has been a part of the fabric of humanity. Whether it's been through true exploration or whether it's just been through the fascination of, say, the iconography of the skull, it's still resonated with people in the public. These images you could find if you ever go to the Palacio Nacional in Mexico City. They're there. So as a surgeon, and many of you may be surgeons, we are sort of kind of like the go fetch people. Something's broken, go fetch and fix it. Something's pushing on something, go fetch and make it stop pushing. And a lot of my day-to-day work is indeed just that. Here's somebody with a C6-7 disc. It's on the right side. It's causing them tricep. This is the right side. Tricep pain, and it's causing them weakness. And so basically, somebody calls me, go fetch. We go to C6-7, take the disc out, put an artificial disc in, and then they're all better. I do even more, I think, what I feel important things as a defender of the central nervous system. Here's somebody with something called Klippel-Feil disease. It's a dissegmentation anomaly in your spine, and literally it draws the bony spine into the middle of the opening of the base of the skull, literally pithing the brainstem on its own, or by its own self. And so that is clearly not a long-term sort of viable situation. So that's, again, titanium, go fetch, go rearrange things and make things look normal. One more example is that, and one of the best things that I think that I do in the sense of my skill set is tumor surgery, and it's mostly brain tumors. And it's amazing to me always that we can go into somebody's head, take out this huge tumor out of somebody's cortex, and they're still pretty much normal people. It just astounds me every time I do it. But the thing that I think I do that's the most interesting, the thing that I think I do that has gravitas towards this discussion about artificial intelligence, is that artificial intelligence is an intelligence that sort of wants to mimic how we think. And how we think is really a notion of how does the brain work. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist, but I am a neurosurgeon, and I do a lot of operations on people that have epilepsy with learning impairments. And so I do feel that I have that at least, say, weight in order to be able to talk to you intelligently about this. One field of neurosurgery that you may or may not be aware of is called neuromodulation. And neuromodulation is basically just that. What you probably realize is that the brain uses as its currency electricity. So electricity is the currency of the brain. And maybe not surprising, if you use the right amount of electricity in the right part of the brain, you can actually create miracles. And it's probably the most satisfying work that I do. These are basically brain-machine interfaces. I think I have to ask for the audiovisual help in the back. So could you go to this? There's a sound file there. I don't know. If it doesn't play, we'll skip it. Make it a lot lower. That's the sound of me approaching somebody with an electrode down this trajectory. You can actually make it a lot lower. It sounds really annoying. And we'll stop that and then go to the next one. Yeah. I think you have to stop this one actually. I think they're playing over each other. Yep. And then you go to the next depth of the brain, and the brain is a little bit like the. Did I change something? Sorry. Could you go back to maybe now this one right here? Get that sound file. Yeah, so the brain is a little bit like the world. There's a certain vernacular, there's a certain language that happens in France that's unique from the language that happens in India. And if you hear something in France, you can probably tell that you're in France versus being in India. And the brain does the exact same thing. So you heard that one area, another area, here's a third area. Now we'll stop this and go to this last one, please. So that's a little subtle and the noise is a little bit low, but you can almost hear that there's a tremor. And that oscillation is about 2 to 4 hertz. And that oscillation, if I hear that and we're in somebody's head, I know that I can stop your tremor. And this is a surgery for essential tremor. Could you stop that now? Thank you. I think I can do this on my own. And if you could bring the sound up, please. So this is deep brain stimulation surgery. This is the ultimate in brain-machine interface. And these patients are awake, and this guy is not holding his hand out of compassion, although he is a compassionate individual. But you'll see what happens when you let go of his hands. And I think that these patients are some of our heroes because they're willing to let us do surgery on them when they're awake. You can see that tremor. That's absolutely disabling. There's no way that this guy can groom himself. He doesn't feed himself. All things are sort of lost. We're in the right brain to affect the left side, he's left-hand dominant. And then we're going to apply just the right amount of electricity in an effort to get him to stop his tremor. Like I said, that's probably one of the most satisfying surgeries I do. I mean, people end up crying, people end up being just so overwhelmed by what's happened. And you can see, this is a little bit of a cheap parlor trick, but we have him holding this, and then we stop the electricity, and then shaking comes back, just to show that it's not just a lesion effect, that it's something that we can control, that we're actually modulating the brain and the central nervous system. And then we'll turn the electricity back on and get his tremor to stop. And that's with the use of electrodes. And I have to say, this is a little bit of what Bob and I do when we're talking about vocal tremors. So he's talking to his wife. You know, he couldn't hold the phone before because it would go flying out of his hand. So the other thing that I do, and I think is even more nuanced with regard to trying to understand the sort of the underpinning of the brain, and I say that with an enormous amount of modesty. Nobody understands the brain, but in order to understand it, the other thing that I'm fortunate to do is epilepsy surgery, or seizure surgery. And a seizure, if you don't know it, it's just a temporary disruption in brain functioning where unfortunately your brain is on fire. Normally there's a lot of things chattering all at the same time, you know, wondering if it's too hot, if it's too cold, should I listen to this clown, you know, things like that. But when everything coalesces, then it's a seizure. And you've probably seen people with that, and it's absolutely disarming and dysfunctional. Seizures are not good. In the past, this is how we used to treat seizures. When I was a resident, we literally take off one side of the skull. We have to make a decision. Was it a seizure coming from the right side? Was it coming from the left side? And then once we did that, we put all these electrodes down and cover the skull, or cover the brain in electrodes, and then wait. And these patients have their skull off, it's painful. This was just like barbaric type of surgery. I can't believe we did it, but I know that we did because I was there. Now, this might look even more bizarre, but we can create frames that let us guide electrodes. I mean, it looks like I've turned this person's head into a pincushion, but I guarantee you there's no incision here. It's just through a pinhole, through the skin, through the skull, through the dura, into the brain, through what we call neuronavigation or stereotactic surgery, to put electrodes into very specific spots of the brain to try to listen to the brain and figure out, is there an ictus, is there a focal location where a seizure is occurring? And believe it or not, when we're lucky, we find a spot. Surgery is just that. Like if somebody comes into my office and tells me like their whole body hurts, I know I can't help them. But if they say, you know what, I have pain running down my buttock, down the thigh to the outer ankle, I know it's L5, and I probably can help them. The same thing happens in the brain. If seizures are happening everywhere, it's probably unlikely that I can help you, because I can't take out all your brain. I mean, I can, but it's not advisable. Here is a hippocampus, and if you don't know anything about the hippocampus, it's probably the most marvelous structure that we have, because without the hippocampus, you cannot make memories. And you would be amazed that if you, and unfortunately seizures do have an often occurrence in the hippocampus. The temporal lobe seizure is usually mesial temporal lobe epilepsy, happens in the hippocampus, and that's why these patients have such poor learning disabilities, because their temporal lobes, the mesial temporal lobe, which is supposed to be encoding memory, is always on fire. But believe it or not, if we can find that there are seizures localized just to one hippocampus, I can take out the hippocampus, find those electrodes, and take out their seizure rictus. And it's, again, amazing that I can take out brain, critical brain, and yet leave somebody better off than they were. You might not understand this, and I'll have to go over a little bit of neuroanatomy with you. But this is somebody who has a seizure coming from their motor cortex. This is a MRI, and you can see this is the left and that's the right. And over here is the motor cortex, and we were able to localize our seizures to the motor cortex. This is the left motor cortex, so it's going to affect the right hand dominant. Now the question comes down to, it's like a Seinfeld episode. You know, do you want to get rid of your seizures, or do you want to still be able to use your hand? And most people would say, I'd rather keep my seizures and not lose function of my dominant right hand. So what do you do? Again, like I said to you, I think the magic of neuroscience is that the magic of the brain and the currency of the brain is electricity. And a little bit of electricity in the right spot makes a difference. And if you can understand the brain to some extent, it makes even a bigger difference. And believe it or not, that's what this is. This is basically a brain pacemaker, but it's really a set of electrodes over the motor cortex, listening for seizures. This is a microprocessor that lives in the skull, and it analyzes seizure behavior. And that's what basically AI does. It takes deep data sets and it learns from them. So it takes a deep data set, which is EEG data, and the patients, when they have their aura, tell the computer that they're going to have a seizure, and the computer then analyzes that and then is able to learn and learn and learn. And then, believe it or not, at some point in time, it fires a discharge to stop the seizure activity. It's amazing. This is what it looks like in somebody who has deep seizures, and you can see the seizures start here in one temporal lobe, then they progress back, and then they go to the other side. The worst thing you could do, and we've done this in the past in neurosurgery, and I'll show you an example of it, is to take out both temporal lobes. You absolutely devastate people. So in this person, it seemed like there was going to be nothing to do except that we have this system in place in his skull, and it picks up the first seizure, and then within 10 seconds, it progresses more posteriorly and jumps to the other side, and we're able to stop these seizures. So this is a surgery that was not possible when I started out in my residency, but it's a surgery that we can do now through AI, deep machine learning, and integrative neuroscience. This is what it looks like. I think I can start with that. So here's a device in the skull. The scalp is pulled away. This is what it looks like on a plain X-ray. And this is this. It's a walking, you now have a patient with a walking, talking EEG forever, and they train the AI. So when we talk about computers and machines, they're great at doing prodigious things, but they're not smart per se. We have to train them on those data sets. And so that's how this works. And that's why I think I have a lot of sort of, say, insight brain-machine interfaces and AI. This is a prototype. And the whole notion here is that there are sometimes surgeries that we do where we have to take off part of the skull, trauma, for instance. Now, the skull, once you take it out, is basically devitalized. It's just like a piece of wood. We put it back to protect the underlying brain. But what about if we were to add functionality to it? It's almost like wasted space, okay? It's not. But it's almost like wasted space. What about if you then were to put back functional appliances that could enhance, say, whatever feature might be, some reason for why we had to take that off? Maybe you had a stroke and we had to take it off, and maybe we can put some feature in that would then enhance your stroke recovery. So these are things that are really true, upfront, and occurring in neurosurgery and neuroscience today. So if you think about it, like you all have a smartphone, that's not a very big device. Imagine if you had a smartphone now embedded into your skull. You'd be on TikTok all the time. So what is AI? I mean, artificial intelligence is technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human intelligence. And that sounds simple, but it's not. Because in order to sort of break this down, and I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a semiotics expert, so if you want to have a deep discussion and argue about any of these terms and their definitions, I will tell you, you win. You know, like, what is intelligence? I mean, I know my dog was smarter than my kids when my kids were young, but now my dog's no longer smarter than my kids. So, intelligence is the ability to learn and solve problems in a ever-changing world. And that's the thing, like a computer has an algorithm that it always applies to a fixed set of variables. But like when Bob is doing surgery or when I'm doing surgery, those fixed set of variables change moment to moment. And so, you know, that's a kind of a broad view of intelligence. Artificial intelligence is that science and engineering of making intelligent machines. Either they're programs, or they're robotic machines, or there's some combination of the two. Autonomous systems are those things that can do an independently planned sequence of steps. Like in some of your hospitals, you might see robots that go and deliver medication from like the pharmacy to the third floor without having any kind of assistance, so to speak. So, you know, that's artificial intelligence. It's not intelligent, but it's artificial intelligence. And those are autonomous systems. And then we have, this is really where the rubber meets the road, machine learning. And that's that part of AI that takes enormous data sets. And it trains it, and it trains it, and it trains it. And in some fields, it's very real, and it's like radiology. I mean, my radiology colleagues every day know that AI can, for the most part, probably do a better job at reading than the average radiologist can, because it can just take these enormous data sets of normal and abnormal and apply very rigid rules to that. It's also happening in histology. Many of my histology colleagues say that they get confirmation through AI regarding pathological slides. I mean, no pathologist is ever going to see 2,000 tumors, brain tumors, in their career, unless they've lived for a long time. And so why not take a data set that has 20,000, 30,000 brain tumors and use that and apply that to pathology? So it's happening, it's real. And then these other things, you can talk about deep learning, which is that thing where we talk about neural networks that really sort of recapitulates the brain. Or you can talk about narrow AI, which is like on your phone, face recognition. It's a very narrow task, and it can do that with a high degree of accuracy. But really what we're talking about when everyone starts talking about things and gets sort of up in arms or excited is, you know, human-level artificial intelligence, human-centered artificial intelligence. It's almost like if any of you saw the, the GPT 4.0 rollout, I think it was this week or last week. I mean, it's extraordinary. It really is extraordinary. And I think that's where we will sort of integrate ourselves in our medical practices. Now, here's a fellow that I like a lot, Terry Pratchett. Some of you might know him. He's a comic, satiric, fantasy writer. Yeah, he's no longer alive, but he wrote a series of books called Discworld. And I think that this is really awesome that he says that the anthropologists got it wrong when they named our species Homo sapien, wise man. Because he says that, you know, it's really arrogant to think that because wisdom is one of our least evident features. And I think that's actually true. In reality, we are Pan's narrow, storytelling chimps. And so, I'm going to tell you a story. You know, I look in this room and I'm grateful to think that at least most of you were born before this movie came out. But this is The Matrix. And 1999, if you need to know. This is really a story of AI gone wrong. And if you've never seen the movie, I'm not a Keanu Reeves fan. Don't hate me for that. But, you know, this is a marvelous movie. In a way, it talks about neuroscience in a way that describes almost the thalamus, describes visual perception, reality perception, and artificial universes inside your own head. And it really highlights the notion of artificial intelligence is that intelligence exists, exhibited by machines, and it was at that battle between humans and machines, you know, carbon and silicon, that highlighted this movie. And I think I can play this.
I know Kung Fu. Show me.
So what that was the character of Keanu Reeves talking to Lawrence Fishburne's character about this notion that's actually happening today. So if any of you follow Elon Musk, he has this program called Neuralink, and Brian Johnson, another one of his PayPal buddies, has his own program. And it's hard to imagine, you can't ignore them, whatever you feel about, say, like Elon Musk. Here's a guy with, you know, unlimited resources who's put $150 million into this project of his where he believes that he can download and upload information into brains. I think that's a little bit of a fantasy, but nevertheless, that's what he wants to do. He's going to do something, and they've already done their first implant, and he's going to find something, and I think he cannot be ignored. So while many scientists really poo-poo about this and think that it's some kind of funny sort of allegory to the Matrix, I think that they're doing something, and I think we all have to follow it, and I think that at least if we're involved in following it, we can set up rules and regulations and do it ethically and conscientiously, as opposed to letting it happen like in the Wild West. In order to really engage in the central nervous system, in order to really make this human level degree of information and knowledge, I think what you need, however, is a deep understanding of what you're trying to model, and that's the brain. And as much as I would love to say I understand the brain, I don't. And I think, you know, it's almost, it's arrogant to think that, you know, billions of cells with quadrillions of connections are things that we're going to be able to model. I understand some very limited, rudimentary things about the brain, but to really get to that level of human intelligence, machine-human intelligence, where carbon and silicon sort of blur the lines, I think this is really true. We're going to have to fully understand how the brain works will require major technological breakthroughs. Because the things that we do as people are absolutely amazing. And you just have to be on one of my services to see people that are afflicted by neurological disease to understand what little things can happen to the brain that can affect you so greatly. Whenever we talk about the brain and try to talk about, say, how do we model it or what do we understand about it, you'll always get these sort of kind of images that look like either fiber maps, this is called diffusion tensor imaging, or you'll get these other maps which are called connectomes, which means that not necessarily all parts of the brain are directly connected, but they might be acting in sync, and they have what we call sort of a resting state. And that maybe your right frontal lobe is connected to your left parietal lobe through a sort of a cohesion, sort of like how, you know, you have a server at in Google and you have another server somewhere else, and somehow that controls web traffic. But again, I'd say that our ability to sort of really understand the brain is, although it's amazing, it's still quite rudimentary. I think one way that we learned about the brain is through very, very crude mechanisms of learning when it didn't work. And many of you may know this story. This is Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker in Vermont. He suffered a blast injury with this spike, a railroad spike, that just went under the left maxilla, through the orbit, into the subfrontal, subfrontal area, and then out his skull. And nobody would have thought that he would have survived but he did. I don't know how. He didn't really have any health care. He just sort of walked to his doctor's office and he said, I have a problem, and the doctor was aghast. I suspect he agreed. The thing we learned about Phineas Gage, although it is a little bit of fantasy because it's not exactly true if you really look into this, but basically was that he was supposed to be somebody who was devout, church-going, whatever, and then after this injury, he became sort of disinhibited, sort of like a frontal lobotomy. And they said that so much that Gage was no longer Gage. And so that gave us some insight into the fact that, you know, maybe the frontal cortex, maybe the left frontal lobe, for instance, might have something to do with social interactions and engagement. I think we learned a lot in neurosurgery by doing things that probably we should never ever do again. And unfortunately, psychosurgery was part of our history in neurosurgery, and I think that's one reason why everyone feels a little bit anxious when neurosurgeons start talking about putting electrodes and things like that into people's brains. You know, they think we're going to turn, you know, Yankee fans into Red Sox fans, Republicans, Democrats, and everyone's going to go independent. But you would think that if somebody talked about doing a lobotomy, somebody would also say, there is no freaking way, that sounds like a good idea. But believe it or not, in the 1950s, this was the rage. And there was a guy named Walter Freeman who was at George Washington GW, I don't know if it's hospital or university, and he went around the country like an evangelist doing what was called the ice pick lobotomy. The bone over the superior orbital roof is really thin, and you can just kind of basically break through that with an ice pick. Then if you swish back and forth in an uncontrolled manner, not knowing what you're doing, you basically disconnect somebody and you make them mute. And that happened to a Kennedy family member. Rose, that was John F. Kennedy's younger sister. She had a birth injury where she had an anoxic birth injury, and she always had neurocognitive difficulty and delay. And then as she got older, she also became more and more disinhibited and was sneaking out and hooking up with men, and that caused her dad, Joe Kennedy, some dismay. It's kind of surprising because Joe Kennedy found enough people to find dismay with. Nevertheless, Joe took Rosemary to Washington, did not tell Rose, her mother, and underwent with Freeman a frontal lobotomy. They say that she was successfully cured and rendered great, except for the fact that nobody heard from her. She went to a convent and was basically maimed and impaired for life. It's Ethel who started Special Olympics in honor of her sister. So again, I told you that there are places to understand the brain is really to understand how we can create paradigms, how we can create programs, how we can do things if we're ever really going to make this incredible leap of melding carbon and silicon into real intelligent thought. And I know certain parts of the brain in a very, very crude way. Like I know that this tumor that came to me lives in a spot that probably has to do with motor function. Most of us would love to think that the brain is so somatotopically organized that there is an area for, you know, telling stories, for your beliefs, for, you know, your apprehensions, but that's not the case. In certain instances, like in this instance, we can do the surgery awake. We can map the brain, we can say, okay, that's your bicep, that's your face, I'm going to stay away from that because you probably want those functions. And we can take that out safely. But I can tell you that I've mapped the brain on a number of occasions for a lot of different reasons, not because I'm brain mapping, but because of tumors that cause me to need to map. And when I've done that in this person, this was really incredible. So these electrodes, this is the left side. So if you're not used to looking at MRI scans, this is the left side. The left side for most of us is the dominant hemisphere. This is the occipital pole, the temporal lobe is right around here. A lot of what make us human lives back here in this junction that allows us to have language and expression and speech and thought. So we had electrodes throughout, blanketing this lesion, as you can see here. That's what these things are in this cartoon, and the purple is the problem. When I stimulated these 5 electrodes repeatedly and consistently, the patient said that time stood still. It was kind of like, and that's why I have the sort of the pictures from the Matrix back here. It's almost like we found the Matrix, you know. And so I knew that, well, I'm not going there. And we're able to get that out safely. But I point that out to you as a thing to say that we really don't know the brain. I wouldn't have expected that somebody would say, no matter where I stimulated in their brain, that like time stood still. She looked fine. She was talking, well, actually she wasn't talking. She looked fine. She was looking at us, looking around. But then when we stopped the stimulation, she said, that was the most bizarre feeling I've ever had. Time just stood still. This is another case, and this is actually from just a couple months ago. There's a tumor here. This is in the left side. This is all anatomic now, not MRI, although there is an MRI superimposed here. You can see here's the ear. So this is left temporal lobe, dominant language, and I'm really worried that if I take this tumor out, this person's going to have no ability to speak, which is an amazing dysfunction. Nobody would ever say, oh yeah, sure, take my tumor out. I don't care if I can't say a word. So I blanketed this tumor with a bunch of electrodes, and when we stimulated here, this anterior portion of his temporal lobe, he recalled the sound of a Philadelphia Phillies broadcast. He couldn't tell me which broadcast it was, whether it was a World Series, because the Phillies have somehow magically won a World Series. But I would not expect that either. So I just point that out to you, that the brain's a complex place. For me to say that sounds stupid, but I see that every day when I work. I think we have to talk about these 4 concepts. And again, anyone that wants to debate me about, how I view this, you're right. If we're going to talk about AI, we're not just talking about these sort of like Boolean things, like if, then. And that's really, how artificial intelligence basically was started. Simple gating theorems that allowed you to take one thing into another thing into another thing. But as people, we think about consciousness. And so what is consciousness? I guess the best way of saying it is it's the voice in your head. It's that internal observer. Sentience, or sentient. That's the ability to feel. So like, your dog is sentient, but the question is it self-aware? And some of you will say absolutely. I would probably say maybe not entirely. And self-awareness really is that spectrum where that entity, creature, whatever, robot, computer, can view itself as being separate from the rest of the world. And then finally there's this term, sapience. Remember Terry Pritchard? That's that wiseness, homo sapien. That's that ability to contemplate and act and use knowledge and understanding to have insight and agency. And in fact, this is what the goal is of AI. Whether that's scary or if that's incredible, that's for you to decide. Again, I think that's why you have to be at the front of this argument in order to help control how the technology gets done, because it's happening. I think about all those terms, consciousness, sentience, self-awareness, intelligence, all the time, because I can tell you whenever I'm operating in the brain, it doesn't happen in the spine, but whenever I'm operating in the brain, it's something that I think about, not disruptive. I deal with consciousness a lot. But I don't deal with consciousness in the sense that I deal with people that are conscious. I deal with consciousness in the opposite sense, that I have to worry about the opposite of consciousness, and that's coma. And we, for better or for worse, see a lot of head trauma, and those head traumas have to get classified. Are they awake? Are they not awake? Are they aware? Can they make decisions for themselves? So one way of looking at consciousness for me is to say, well, you know, if your Glasgow Coma scale is 15, and that's the scale here, you're at least awake, aware, and conscious. If your Glasgow Coma scale is less than 7, you're probably not. And then you would ask, where is consciousness? I love this definition of consciousness. It just basically takes, this one I can agree with every day. It's that annoying time between naps. And I agree because I like to nap, and I find that when I'm awake, I'm annoyed. So, that is, at its heart, consciousness. But if I were to define where is consciousness in the brain, I'd have a hard time, but I can tell you it's in the brain, and that's another thing. If you want to argue with me that consciousness is in the elbow or somewhere else, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to stand fast to that. Sorry. So I can tell you that if I take out this tumor, and you've seen this tumor before, this person is conscious, they're awake, they're still intelligent, they're aware, and they can make decisions. So that doesn't necessarily say that consciousness does not exist here, because this is that spot where, remember, that one patient was the sort of like the time freezes zone. But I can tell you that that's not consciousness. This person has a dramatic bifrontal injury. We had to take the bone off, and then as they start to heal, you can see they almost have, there's definitely no right frontal lobe, and there's very little left frontal lobe. But they're still aware. They're sentient. You know, do they have the ability to make their own decisions? That's probably a good question. But consciousness, they're definitely aware. They're aware of themselves. They have that internal voice in their head. Here's probably where it gets more to the heart of the matter. This person with this stroke over here in the brainstem, and if you don't know what this part of the brain is, it's called the pons. You can always remember it because the pons is pregnant. And so the pons looks like that, and just about everything that has to pass from your brain to the rest of your body has to go through your brainstem. And so there are a lot of incredibly critical structures here, like the reticular activating system, for instance, that we probably think has a lot to do with arousal. And that's probably something, some place where consciousness exists. This person is fully conscious even if they can't move their arms and legs. That's an awful situation in and of itself. This person is absolutely unconscious. And so I get to that only because, again, I'm just trying to show you that there are shades of uncertainty here, that as we move forward with artificial intelligence, these shades of uncertainty have to be peeled back in order for us to understand how to move the technology further. Because if you look at ChatGPT, or if you look at GPT 4.0, it's an incredible parlor trick. I mean, I'm not saying that it was easy to do, but it's just an incredible trick because I don't think that that voice, that thing, has agency. And that's something that we can also debate. But if we're ever going to get to that point where we're going to use artificial intelligence as true intelligence, we're going to have to understand much better rules as to how our brains work. This is an interesting thing that I just wanted to talk to you about, and it's something that some of you might know because you're just up on neuroscience, or something that might be interesting for you to find out right now. This guy was known as HM for many, many years, Henry Morrison. He had a biking accident when I think he was 9 or 11, and he had intractable epilepsy by the time he was 27. High-dose medications, nothing helped him. He was basically incapacitated. He met this guy at Hartford Hospital, William Beecher Scoville. And Dr. Scoville had done temporal lobectomies, mostly on neuropsychiatric patients. But he felt that Henry's seizures were localized to his temporal lobe. So he proposed removing both temporal lobes. And he did that. And Henry survived. The only thing was that after surgery, Henry had no ability to form new memories. And so he could talk to you, he could remember his name, He could engage in light conversation, but he had no insight because he had no memory. And if you go back to Terry Pritchard saying that, we are storytelling chimps, that's what we are. We tell stories. That's what we do as humans. We get together and we engage in that manner. And I would wonder, was Henry conscious? Of course he was conscious. Did he have agency? Probably not. And so these are the things that I think, those realms that seem almost like science fiction or Twilight Zone episodes, these are the things that we deal with reality, and these are the things that will be woven into artificial intelligence. If none of you remember anything from this talk, I just want you to remember this guy, Alan Turing. Because I think that while a lot of credit has been given to Einstein as one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, and certainly I'm not going to debate, special relativity. Special relativity doesn't help you every day when you're going below the speed of light. So, Alan Turing was a brilliant mathematician. As a matter of fact, the victory of the Allies over the Axis in World War II, if any of you have seen the movie or have read the story, he was critical to code breaking the Enigma machine. Alan Turing fundamentally asked the question, and this is sort of like this funny Venn diagram, and whenever we talk about humans and machines or robots, we all seem to put up one with these kind of like circuit designs and one is people, and there is that Venn diagram in the middle that doesn't have either. And at some point in time, he was asking, when will that Venn diagram be one, where you can't tell the difference between a machine and a person? And that's what he called, in this paper, 1950, not that long ago, the imitation game. And it's worth looking into, it's worth reading about, and this guy was brilliant. That imitation game is what happens when you deal with that chat bot from, Philadelphia Gas and Water or Electric. I clearly don't pay my bills. But I mean, when you deal with them and they're like asking you, how can I help you? And you're like, you clearly are not a person, or you're a very challenged person. And it's that notion of sapience or wisdom. And that's where we're taking that interface between what we know as carbon beings, turning that into circuitry and algorithms, and becoming this notion for artificial intelligence. Alan Turing knew it. And these guys, well, okay, let me get to this first. This is an interesting notion. So this is Desk Set. It's a wonderful movie. I hate to say that it's a rom-com, but it is, but it's still wonderful. It talks about the sort of interface, almost 70 years ago, between the clash of computers and people. And it was based on this computer called the EMRAC, Electromagnetic Memory and Research Arithmetic Calculator, a made-up thing, but nevertheless, something that was going to take over the role of Katharine Hepburn, because she was the librarian. And then I just want to point out to you that the word computer, because we use that every day, really doesn't mean a machine. When computer was first introduced, it was a person. It was a person who computed. And inevitably, it was women. And inevitably, those women were women that did really hard mathematical problems. For instance, like the code breaking at Bletchley Hall, or even probably you've seen the movie Hidden Figures that NASA used for their manned space program. I want to bring up this term, CAPTCHA, because if we talk about Alan Turing asked the question, can you tell the difference between a human and a computer? CAPTCHA is almost the reverse. CAPTCHA is completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. And so what the CAPTCHA is now doing is asking, the computer is asking if it can tell that you're a human or a computer. Because if you're a computer, it's not going to allow you to take the next step. And these guys, and CAPTCHA is only recent. I mean, the notion of this is actually from probably 1997, but Louis von Ahn and his colleagues at Carnegie Mellon and IBM used it and described this in 2003, using CAPTCHA to solve hard problems for AI. And actually, once we're able to do that, or once that's possible, AI will take it another step forward. And why is CAPTCHA so incredible? I mean, like here you can see this says, you know, polish, you know, this says spade, jewel, canvas. What is so hard to try to get these things right? Well, there are three things: invariant recognition, segmentation, and parsing to complete the task. And I'm not going to get into any, you know, nitty-gritty or machine learning detail, but invariant recognition just is that ability to recognize letters despite a large amount of randomness in the background. And segmentation is the ability to separate one letter from another, like, you know, is that D part of the E or is it not? And parsing just simply tells it, can I put this all together holistically? And this, any one of these is a significant challenge for a computer. All three of them virtually render most computers useless in terms of being able to, you know, decode this. There are programs that do that, and there are basically sweatshops that feed all these different kind of CAPTCHAs so computers can learn the CAPTCHAs to then try to subvert the CAPTCHAs. But because we use that human advantage and using our sensory skills and our cognitive deductions, that's how we're able to kind of get through. And that's where we are. That's sort of like the forefront. That's why I say, like, you know, Chat 4 or GPT 4.0 is incredible, but it's still kind of like a parlor trick. But once we can, or somebody does, get to this level of understanding how you can have a machine fool a machine, that's, I think, when AI really will have taken off. I can't, we have just like about 2 minutes left, and I do want to finish on time. So I think there can't be a talk about artificial intelligence without showing you the words artificial intelligence for the first time. And that's in this, this entreaty here. So basically, John McCarthy is a young mathematician at Dartmouth. The years, I think, 1956 or 1955, or 1955. He writes to the Rockefeller Foundation that, hey, I think it would be a really good idea to have a summer program on artificial intelligence. And he's got 3 other friends, Minsky from Harvard, Neil Rochester from IBM, and C.E. Shannon from Bell Labs, and they're all in on this. And I think the thing that I love about this is that, and we get away from this so much in our academic settings, I love this engagement between academics and industry. And I think that's something, just as an aside, that we've lost, and something that really was very powerful. So these guys, this is Shannon, this is Minsky, McCarthy, and Rochester. They have this course where they want every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence that could, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine would be made to simulate it. That's 70 years ago. So these guys, that was their goal. This is where this field was. This is where this field is coming to. And I think that by showing you how machines and humans engage and how we learn more and more about how our psychology, our predictive sort of modeling, our own neural anatomy is what's going to bring these AI into a more and more powerful role. I'm just going to finish here by, because I think I love this, the notion of carbon life and silicon life. Well, first of all, I don't think that there's really going to be a silicon life. It doesn't. Yes, they have 4 covalent bonds and they can do a lot of things, but they are very different. If you look at Star Trek in that initial iteration, 1967, The Devil in the Dark, this thing, this Horta, was causing havoc on the mining colony, I think it was Janus 6. And as it always happens in Star Trek, a message comes out for them to investigate. This thing turns out to be some kind of sentient creature made entirely out of silicon. And as a physician, I just love this. You know, Forrest Kelly says, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer, because this thing needs to be treated. And Kirk says, you're a healer. Just fix the damn patient, basically. So it's just my light-hearted humor at taking carbon and silicon and just saying that, you know, while I understand that AI is not going to create a creature like that, I do think that we have to worry. I know that I'm running over. In China, when I went there actually just before the pandemic, I didn't pause it. They are doing so much in Shanghai at this one hospital where, like, I have 3 indications for deep brain stimulation. They're doing it for obsessive compulsive disease, for addiction, for gambling, for opiate addiction, for smoking, for anorexia, for overeating, for suicidality. I'm not saying that they're doing something that's unreasonable, but they will definitely find out more by doing that than we have right now. And that's really going to probably also help push us to the boundaries of AI. We have to come up with rules for it, and I found this from the intelligence community. I think we have to kind of come up with our own rules about how we utilize AI. And I think some of this is true. It has to be advanced in a manner that respects human dignity, rights, and freedom, and it has to be, you know, it has to preserve our autonomies. There are notions about our thoughts are our own thoughts. There's something called moral ethics, and I think that that's worth a discussion. You know, this is, I was a classics major before I became a neurosurgeon, and this is one of the books that I've actually can claim to have read from start to finish, but in translation. This is Homer talking about Odysseus going through the Straits of Medina, so between Sicily and Calabria, and you've got the Scylla and the Charybdis. And this is a 6-headed monster, and this is a whirling vortex. And if you come too close to the 6-headed monster, you lose 6 people in your boat. If you come too close to the vortex, you lose everyone in your boat. So navigating these straits, that's the notion, you know, finding yourself between a rock and a hard place, is going to be the challenge as we move forward. But I think if we do that with ethical considerations, our patients will trust us. And I think that's all I have to say. So I do want to say that I have to really appreciate the opportunity to be here, to the organizing committee, in particular to Bob, to let me talk to you. I know that the program is really diverse and it goes till Sunday, but find a soft pretzel or a cheesesteak, go to the Barnes and look at a Carico, or just go to the Rocky Steps. I can be found at the Bitter Almond if anyone has any questions, and that's really it.